Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time I'm once again going to try to answer a few questions here, and we'll kick it off with this one from Blue Diamond Director, who asked, "Hey Thor, how do you feel about Disney using EU characters in their own projects? I don't care for the way they handled Thrawn and Ahsoka, but what if writers used them better? For example, how would you have felt if the character of Deidre in Andor was instead Ysain Assard, and the ISB Major was her father Armand, who was mentioned in the Tarkin novel, the series ending her story with her having her father taken away to be executed? Would that work, or would that have just been pandering? Should EU characters be left alone? Love to hear your thoughts. Keep up the good work." And in theory, it is something I am for, seeing EU characters brought back into the new canon, as long as it is essentially the same character in maybe slightly different scenarios or circumstances around them. Because obviously you can't bring in a character one for one anymore because the EU and the new canon are not one and the same. But you can bring them into a similar situation, or kind of being the same thing that they once were, with Thrawn being a perfect example. He obviously led the remnants of the Empire in the EU, and he is seemingly about to do the same in the new canon. So you can essentially have a very similar character, the same character, just again in slightly different circumstances. And I'm 100% fine with that if they can get him right. I'm in agreement with you. I don't think Thrawn felt like Thrawn in the Ahsoka series. He felt like a different character, someone attempting to be like the Thrawn, but just not written well enough. Some out there may disagree. They may felt like that was Thrawn from the EU, but I didn't, which is also maybe one of the problems of bringing in EU characters. It is all going to be how you personally feel about them too. There was another question like this one I got from Michael Griffin, who kind of asked about making a Revan trilogy, which in theory sounds amazing. I would love a Revan trilogy, and he laid out a good idea for it. But in reality, I think one of the problems with Revan particularly is the fact that a lot of people think of him as differently, or think of her as differently, because you could have played her as a female character. You kind of have your own vision of what the character is and should be based on you personally, or how you played the character. There is a part of you in Revan more so than maybe any other Star Wars character out there. And so, though, again, I love the idea of making a Revan trilogy if it could be done right, I think you have the problem of anytime you bring in a character from elsewhere that is beloved and you have to make some changes to them, there are people who are not going to accept those changes and some who will. So you might just be better off not bringing them in? I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want to see Mara Jade brought in and have her be just an Inquisitor who used to, or be the hand of the Emperor still, and she has a totally different story from what she once had, because then it just doesn't feel like the same character. It just feels like you're using her in name alone to get my attention and to get me to watch and buy stuff. And so there's a very fine line here. If you want to bring in those old characters, if you want to use them again, they have to be very similar to those old characters. And even still, you're going to have people who are just like, that's not that character, don't use their name. So maybe the best thing to do is to not use those characters and to instead maybe start the EU up again. Or maybe you make animated shows based on EU characters, or based on EU stories, I should say. A lot of you know someone just put out the first part of Heir to the Empire in anime form, and as far as I know, it got some crazy views, it's getting lots of love. And that is something maybe Disney and Lucasfilm should look at. Maybe every now and then we could get an animated EU story. Maybe we could get new books and comics in the EU. Those literally cost them pennies, essentially, or pennies to them, to publish new books and comics. But yeah, I'm not opposed to the idea of bringing in EU characters, as long as there is a legitimate attempt to pay homage to them and to be the same characters they were, again, just in different situations, or slightly different situations. But if you're using them in name alone, you're probably much better off not doing that. Alright, and moving on now to a question from Butcher Pete, who asked, "Hey Thor, do you think Star Wars would benefit if they just focused on video game media? They seem to have some good momentum right now with the Jedi games, and maybe they could finally make something like the 1313 project that's an action RPG, and pops like Skyrim did. I think they could regain some fans through that medium. And though I don't know that they should just focus on video games, I do think there needs to be a new and improved and greater focus on video games than has been in recent years, and that is in large part thanks, of course, to their idiotic exclusive licensing deal with EA that they did about a decade ago, and which finally recently ended. That was about the dumbest thing they could have done with Star Wars, and that's saying something considering some of the dumb things they've done. There are literally millions and millions of people who will play Star Wars video games, especially if they're good. So to get rid of LucasArts and to again give the license to EA, who put out a game like every other year, and some of them were better than others, with the Jedi games being better than, say, the Battlefront games, though the second Battlefront game, from what I've heard, got much better towards the end. But yeah, a new focus on video games should be a priority, honestly. It is a very popular medium. It is a way to tell some great Star Wars stories and to get maybe new, younger blood into the franchise because, yeah, young people do tend to play a lot of video games. Okay, and now we move on to this question from Paul McSoul, who asked, Hey Thor, given the best parts of the Kenobi and the Ahsoka series were when Anakin showed up, should Disney be making more use of Hayden in shows and films? And I think this is kind of a tricky question because, on the one hand, you're going to have fans who, at this point, after everything Disney has done with the franchise again, who anytime you bring in Anakin or Hayden, they're just going to say, oh, there's more key jangling, there's nostalgia bait, you don't really have anything new to give us, you're just recycling the old in order to get us to keep watching. But on the other hand, he is, in many ways, kind of the main character of Star Wars, you could argue, or his family certainly is at the core of Star Wars. So he should be able to be used again, especially in stories that focus on, say, Kenobi or Ahsoka, where he was such an integral part of their story, and they were an integral part of his. It makes sense that Anakin, played by Hayden, would show up in the Kenobi series where Ewan McGregor is returning. But yeah, I don't think Anakin should be used all the time, all willy-nilly, but if the situation calls for it, if the story calls for it, then don't be afraid to bring him in. Or don't be afraid to maybe use him pretty extensively in a certain show or movie that it would make sense in. Because again, Anakin is one of the best characters in Star Wars, and Hayden Christensen has become one of the beloved actors in Star Wars, so as long as you do it well, as long as you do it respectfully, bring him in and use him. Okay, now we move on to this one from JMS Rex, who asked, Hey Thor, do you think we should get the Wills in a big Star Wars story? I know George Lucas was going to use them in his sequel trilogy, and I remember hearing that they were the ones recording the history of Star Wars. I also heard that George was going to make them microscopic beings or something to that effect. Anyways, do you think something like that could work for a story? If so, what would you do for them? And even George Lucas himself, when he talked about that he was going to explore the microbiotic realm in his sequel trilogy, even he acknowledged that there were probably going to be a lot of people that hated it. Because, let's be real, a lot of people did not like the midichlorians in the prequels, and we can debate the hell out of them. I don't really have a problem with them. I think they make sense. I think they simply act as a conduit to hear the will of the Force. They are not the Force. They're not generating the Force. And when you consider that the Force is life and life is the Force, essentially, that's what it is. The Force is generated by life, and if you don't have life, you don't have the Force. I think Lucas wanted to give that all a biological explanation. Now, you can completely disagree with him wanting to do that. You can like it just kind of being this mystical energy field, which it is simply described as in the OT. Or maybe you like the idea of going a little deeper and exploring how it all actually works on a biological level, essentially. And what Lucas has said about the Wills is that they ride around in people like cars and that they feed off the Force. And I could go into a very long theory video on all of that. Maybe I will in the not too distant future if people want to hear my crazy thoughts on this or what I think Lucas meant by it all. But to put it short and sweet, I think what he is saying is that the Wills kind of experience life through people and they're probably trying to learn about life through people. That is essentially what the Journal of the Wills is, them kind of recording the events of this galaxy and trying to maybe make sense of it all, trying to find the meaning of life, potentially. And when he says they feed off the Force, I don't think he is saying that they consume it or eat the Force or anything quite like that. I've likened it to kind of feeding off the energy of a crowd at a sporting event, right? Where it kind of is what fuels you to play better. And in this case, when the Force is, say, balanced, which is what I think the Wills want, they want to see the Force balanced, they are able to feed off that and they prosper and thus all life prospers. Again, I have some really weird, crazy theories about this, and maybe that is best saved for another time. All right, let's move on to this one from Rainy Carnival, who asked, Hey Thor, if someone were completely selfish in the Star Wars universe, every decision they make is based entirely on if it benefits them, but only committed universally good deeds selfishly, do you think that would bring the Force closer to or further from balance? On the one hand, it helped countless people. On the other, it was done to benefit the self, an inherently dark side act. And I don't know that intent always matters that much when it comes to the dark side. And what I mean by that is, and I think Gandalf to Frodo in Lord of the Rings can sum it up better than I will be able to sum it up. But it's when Gandalf is offered the ring by Frodo, and he basically says, I would take this ring to try to do good, but through me, it's going to do some pretty horrible things. And I think that's how the dark side works too. You may set off with the greatest and best of intentions, and I would argue Anakin had some pretty good intentions. He wanted to bring peace, justice, and security to his new empire. But you start off with good intentions, but eventually the dark side will corrupt you. You will start doing things that maybe go a little further than you maybe initially would have gone to bring that peace and justice and security. Through you, the dark side is going to enact its will, even if you think you are using the dark side to enact your own will. That is kind of the catch-22 of it all. That is the big problem. You don't even realize how far you have fallen, or the things that you're willing to do now are things you once weren't willing to do, like slaughter a room full of children because they are the enemy, because now you fully believe the Jedi to be lying and being the bad guys. In other words here, I don't think it is possible in the long term to use the dark side to do good things. It just doesn't work that way. It is not going to allow you to do that. You may set out with good intentions. You may do some good along the way. You may actually save some people or help people or make things better, but long term, it is going to corrupt you. It is going to take control, and before you know it, you're doing horrible things, just like Anakin did. Okay, and one final question here, and it comes to us from WolfXP2, who asked, "Hey Thor, what is your least favorite thing about your favorite Star Wars movie?" And this is tricky because I love everything about Return of the Jedi, though if I'm being objective, if I'm trying to think of what would irk me the most if I take a step back and look at it, it would probably be the plan to rescue Han Solo, that it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense when you try to analyze it. And yeah, I've seen some people kind of break it down and have some good theories about what exactly they were trying to do or trying to accomplish and how. But in all reality, it is not the best plan in the world. I mean, I love the Jabba's Palace and the Sarlacc pit sequence, but in all reality, their plan is kind of a confusing one if you're just trying to figure out what is going on in the moment and why they would send in Chewbacca to be taken captive and why they send in the droids first, like they knew things were going to go wrong. And I've done videos on this, so I won't go too much into it now. It doesn't bother me that much. I don't think it's that bad. I'm not saying it makes the movie bad or anything, but it definitely could have made a little more sense, I think. All right, that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn. Take to the comments below and tell me what you think about anything and everything I had to say. Also, a big thank you to all the people who have been leaving questions lately. There's an absolute ton of them. I try to answer as many as I can, but again, I can't get to all of them, so don't take it personally if I don't answer yours. Doesn't mean I didn't like the question or it was a bad question. Sometimes I know if I answer that question, I'm going to ramble on for too long, like I am right now. So anyway, take to the comments below, ask your questions, or just put your comments down there about what you think, and let's talk some Star Wars. And so, until next time, thanks for watching.